Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
Sheila St. Clair's disappearance is a troubling and mysterious case that has remained unsolved since 2015. Last seen on August 20th, 2015, at the Cascade Apartments on West 3rd Street in Duluth, Minnesota, Sheila was preparing to travel to the White Earth Reservation, but she never made it there. There is also mention of her possibly wanting to go to Red Cliff, Wisconsin, but she never arrived in either location. Despite her planned journey, Sheila disappeared without a trace, and it wasn't until September 10th that she was officially reported missing, leaving authorities with a growing sense of urgency. What stands out in this case is that Sheila did not own a vehicle at the time of her disappearance. This detail suggests that she may have tried to get a ride to reach her destinations, making her even more vulnerable in her travels. The fact that she had no known mode of transportation makes her disappearance even more perplexing, as it raises questions about how and why she vanished without a trace while potentially relying on others for transportation. One of the most troubling aspects of Sheila's disappearance is how completely out of character it was for her to leave without any word or warning. According to those who knew her, Sheila was not the type of person to simply disappear. Her sudden absence, combined with the absence of any communication, led investigators to classify her case as suspicious. It's unclear what circumstances led to her disappearance, but the lack of evidence, coupled with the nature of her departure, suggests that foul play might be involved. Since the day she was last seen, there have been no confirmed sightings of Sheila, and her whereabouts remain unknown. Investigators are still trying to piece together the events surrounding her disappearance, but the case remains unresolved. The Duluth Police Department continues to investigate Sheila St. Clair's disappearance, and her case is still open. Anyone with information about Sheila St. Clair's disappearance is urged to contact the Duluth Police Department at 218-730-5050. Mildred Butterworth Roche's disappearance remains a haunting and unresolved mystery, with many questions surrounding the circumstances of her last known whereabouts. On May 31st, 1976, Mildred was last seen by her parents at their farm in Mankato, Minnesota. She and her husband, Ronald Roche, were preparing to leave for their home in Fargo, North Dakota, but shortly after that, she vanished without a trace. Despite the time that has passed since her disappearance, there's been little concrete information about what happened to her. Ronald Roche gave a version of events that raised suspicion from the very beginning. According to Ronald, Mildred left him on June 2nd, 1976, after a conversation in which he told her he wanted a divorce. He claimed that Mildred packed 2 suitcases, an overnight bag, some cash, and traveler's checks totaling $3,000 to $4,000 before leaving. His story suggested that Mildred was leaving on her own accord, but this would be the last time anyone saw her or heard from her directly. Ronald later stated that he had received a phone call from Mildred in August 1976, during which she allegedly told him that she was in Boston, Massachusetts. He suggested that she might have been living there at the time. However, despite this claim, police found no evidence to support that Mildred had ever been in Boston or that she had made such a phone call. This lack of confirmation made her disappearance even more perplexing, raising suspicions that Ronald's account of the events may not have been entirely truthful. What raised even more concern was Ronald's initial lack of urgency about his wife's disappearance. He claimed that he wasn't worried because Mildred had wanted to leave him for a long time and had left for short periods in the past. This nonchalant attitude toward her absence struck investigators as odd, especially considering that Mildred had a prescription for phenobarbital, which she had not refilled since her disappearance. This unexplained absence of her medication added to the uncertainty of the case and suggested that something more sinister might have occurred. In 1996, police revisited Ronald's role in Mildred's disappearance. They questioned him once more and even dug up the backyard of his Fargo residence in an effort to uncover any evidence that might shed light on what had happened to Mildred. However, their search yielded no new information, and authorities were left with more questions than answers. Despite these renewed efforts, no charges have ever been filed against anyone in connection with her disappearance, and the case remains unsolved. Ronald Roche passed away in 2018, but that has not brought an end to the search for Mildred or to the questions about her fate. Mildred's disappearance is further complicated by the lack of evidence in the case. No one has been able to confirm her whereabouts after she supposedly left Ronald in 1976, and the only clue that could offer a glimpse into her fate is the fact that she never refilled her phenobarbital prescription, something that would have been crucial for her health. This is a detail that seems to indicate Mildred may have not left willingly or planned to disappear on her own. As of now, the Fargo Police Department continues to investigate Mildred's case. Despite the passage of time, the case remains open. Cynthia Schmidt and Ronnie Bromenschenkel's disappearances are shrouded in mystery, and as the years have passed, what seemed like a simple case of two people running away has evolved into something much more ominous. The last confirmed sighting of Cynthia was on August 16, 1986, at the Riverview Trailer Park in St. Cloud, Minnesota. At that time, she disappeared alongside her boyfriend, Ronnie. For a while, authorities thought that both might have simply run away, especially given Cynthia's history and their lifestyles at the time. Cynthia Schmidt had been in trouble with the law in the past, and her behavior was often described as unpredictable and, at times, abrasive. These characteristics, combined with her legal issues, led investigators to initially consider that she may have decided to leave on her own, perhaps with Ronnie, and that they were trying to escape their troubles. However, as months and then years went by with no word from either Cynthia or Ronnie, investigators began to reconsider this theory. Their families hadn't heard from them, which became increasingly concerning as time passed without any signs of life. The absence of contact raised alarms, particularly because both Cynthia and Ronnie had been in regular communication with their loved ones prior to their disappearance. The fact that no one had heard from them for such a long period of time prompted law enforcement to reevaluate their initial theory. As more time passed without any clues or sightings of the couple, investigators began to consider the possibility of foul play. There were indications that both Cynthia and Ronnie may have been involved in something more dangerous than just a relationship gone wrong. Specifically, they were believed to have been involved in a money laundering scam prior to their disappearance. This connection to criminal activity introduced the idea that their vanishing could have been linked to the dangerous world of illicit dealings, which might have played a role in their tragic fate. The theory of foul play gained more traction as investigators uncovered these ties to criminal activities. It's thought that Cynthia and Ronnie might have been caught up in something far darker than they had anticipated, and that their disappearance could have been a result of their involvement in the scam. This line of thinking leads investigators to believe that both Cynthia and Ronnie were likely victims of foul play and are now presumed to be deceased. Despite numerous attempts to unravel the mystery of what happened to Cynthia Schmidt and Ronnie Bromenschenkel, both cases remain unsolved to this day. There have been no breakthroughs, no discoveries of remains, and no significant evidence that could lead to answers for their families. The involvement in the money laundering scheme, combined with the lack of communication and the years of unanswered questions, paints a grim picture of their fate. Today, the cases of Cynthia and Ronnie remain open. Lucia Perez, a 32-year-old woman from Worthington, Minnesota, vanished without a trace in late June 2011. Her disappearance remains unsolved, and to this day, she has never been heard from again. What makes her case particularly troubling is the involvement of Bernardino Ramirez Perez, a man with multiple aliases, including Jose Rafael Santiago Torres and Omar Marrero Torres. Bernardino's connection to Lucia remains a central point of investigation. In the days leading up to Lucia's disappearance, she and Bernardino were reportedly traveling together. They stopped at various businesses, seemingly applying for jobs. During this time, it is believed they may have traveled to Rock Valley, Iowa, in Bernardino's maroon Buick Century, a vehicle captured in photos and shown in connection with the case. Lucia is suspected of having visited several businesses in the northwest Iowa region, yet no concrete leads emerge from these locations. She has not been seen or heard from since that time. The story began to unravel when Bernardino returned to Worthington on June 26th. He had a large scratch on his face, an injury he did not explain in a convincing way. Bernardino claimed that Lucia had been detained in Hull, Iowa, due to an immigration problem, but authorities quickly determined this story was false. His explanation seemed to be an attempt to cover up whatever had really happened. Investigators processed his vehicle, but no evidence was found that could shed light on Lucia's disappearance, leaving them with more questions than answers. Bernardino's criminal history further complicates the case. He has a long record of sexual and physical violence, including domestic violence and charges related to sexual assault and kidnapping. At the time of Lucia's disappearance, Bernardino was facing active warrants for his arrest in connection with these previous crimes. This added an extra layer of concern for authorities, especially given that he had a history of violent behavior. Shortly after the investigation into Lucia's case began, Bernardino abruptly left town. His disappearance, coinciding with the onset of the investigation, raised red flags. Authorities believe that Bernardino may have been trying to evade capture, but despite extensive efforts to locate him, his current whereabouts remain unknown. To this day, he is only considered a person of interest in Lucia's case, not a suspect. However, his ties to her disappearance remain undeniable, and law enforcement continues to consider him a key figure in the investigation. Lucia left behind 3 children, a son who was an adult at the time, and 2 younger children. Their lives were shattered by her sudden disappearance, and the absence of their mother has undoubtedly had a profound and lasting impact on them. The Worthington Police Department, the agency tasked with investigating her case, continues to work on uncovering what happened to Lucia Perez. Despite their efforts, the case remains unsolved. As of 2025, there are no new leads or developments in the case. The Worthington Police Department urges anyone with information about Lucia's disappearance to come forward, as the case remains open and under investigation. They can be contacted at 507-295-5400. Victor Jackie Theal's disappearance is one of the most perplexing and heartbreaking unsolved cases in Minnesota's history. On September 5, 1944, Jackie attended his first day of school at Paynesville, Minnesota, a day that should have marked an exciting milestone in his young life. It was a half day of school, and his mother had arranged for him to come home for lunch and stay there. She sent him to school with a note for the teacher, explaining that Jackie's older brother would pick him up. However, at 11:30 a.m., instead of waiting for his brother, Jackie's teacher allowed him to leave the school alone, asking him if he knew the way home. Jackie, a young child with a slower mental pace, did know the general direction of his home, located on the corner of Lake Avenue South and East Railroad Street in Paynesville. Tragically, he never made it there. After Jackie left school, his trail became puzzling and eerie. Bloodhounds were brought in to track his scent, and the search led investigators to Augusta Avenue, a block west of Washburn Street, not far from his home. The trail continued west toward the Crow River, just west of the North American Creamery. The searchers found tracks leading along the river, which went as far as Highway 23. After that, the scent and tracks abruptly vanished, leaving no further clues. This was the only indication of Jackie's whereabouts after he left school that fateful day. Witnesses reported seeing a small boy who resembled Jackie standing along Highway 23 at 1 p.m., but it was never confirmed that it was him. A few hours later, another witness reported seeing a boy matching his description getting into a gray car at 4:45 p.m. on the same highway. Again, it remains unclear whether this boy was indeed Jackie. These unconfirmed sightings added to the growing mystery of his disappearance. Jackie's family and loved ones, who described him as a slow child who was not allowed to go far from home or run errands by himself, struggled to make sense of the events. While he wasn't considered mentally disabled, he had a slower pace of learning than his siblings, which made his independence and ability to navigate the world more limited. His family believed that Jackie may have become lost and was picked up by a stranger along Highway 23, possibly by someone with ill intentions. Some even speculated that a soldier stationed in the Army at the time, who could be discharged if they had dependents, might have taken Jackie, though there is no direct evidence to support this theory. In the 1960s, a mysterious twist in the case occurred when one of Jackie's former teachers saw a man matching his description in California. The man, who was disembarking from a Navy ship, identified himself as Jackie Theal and claimed to have been adopted. However, it was never confirmed if this man was the same Jackie who had vanished in 1944, leaving another potential clue that remains unresolved. Jackie was one of 15 children, and his disappearance left a hole in the lives of his family, particularly his siblings. Some of his surviving relatives, including his sister and brother, continue to live in the Paynesville area and search for answers. Unfortunately, the police no longer have the records of their investigation, as the archives only go back to 1960, meaning much of the case's early evidence has been lost to time. Despite this, Jackie has never been declared legally dead, and his case remains an open mystery. The disappearance of Jackie Theal has haunted his family for decades, and while the passage of time has obscured many details, the hope for answers still lingers. What happened to Jackie on that day, in 1944? Did he become lost and picked up by a stranger, or was there a more complex, hidden story behind his vanishing? David Thompson's disappearance is a perplexing case that has left many questions unanswered since July 1st, 1979. On that day, David was last seen standing by Highway 7 and Williston Road in Minnetonka, Minnesota. He was carrying a backpack but had no other belongings with him, and there was no indication of what he planned to do or where he was heading. His sudden vanishing sparked concerns and speculation, but it would take years for the full extent of his disappearance to unfold. David had worked as a writer and journalist for much of his life, and his career took him to various European countries. He was known for his adventurous spirit and his desire to experience the world beyond the confines of modern society. In fact, David had written a book titled In the Shining Mountains, a would-be mountain man in search of wilderness, which was published in 1979, the same year he disappeared. The book explores the theme of a man seeking to live like an old-fashioned mountain man, isolated from the encroaching modern world. His loved ones believe that the book may have reflected his own desires, and they suspect that he may have been seeking to live off the land, away from civilization, much like the character in his own story. Following his disappearance, it is known that David worked briefly for two employers later that same year. He spent some time at Lumont Drilling Associates in Denver, Colorado, and Maverick Construction in Casper, Wyoming. However, the records of these employments are scarce, and there is no concrete timeline for his work with either company. It remains unclear when exactly these jobs took place, and more importantly, there's been no sign of David since 1979. David's family and friends have long held the belief that he may have chosen to leave everything behind, vanishing without a trace in pursuit of the life he wrote about in his book. They suspect that he intentionally cut ties with society, seeking to live a solitary, independent life in the wilderness, far removed from the modern world he often criticized. This theory is supported by David's lifestyle, his personal writings, and his known desire for solitude, but the lack of evidence or sightings leaves this speculation just that, an unproven theory. Texas authorities are currently assisting with the investigation into David Thompson's disappearance. And while the case remains open, no definitive leads have emerged to explain what happened to him after he was last seen in Minnetonka. The mystery of David's fate continues to endure, and whether he truly sought the life he wrote about, or if something else transpired, is a question that remains unresolved. Shay Terson, a 29-year-old man from Maple Grove, Minnesota, has been missing since March 26, 2023. He was last seen near the Wabasha Street Bridge in St. Paul, Minnesota, on March 27, 2023. Shay is described as being 6 feet tall, weighing 190 pounds, with hazel green eyes, dark blonde hair, and a dark red-colored beard. He also has a visible scar on the inside of his right forearm from a previous surgery. On the day he was last heard from, Shay's wallet, ID, and daily medication were found in his car. While he had his phone with him, it has been off since March 26th, and his family and friends are deeply concerned about his safety and well-being. Despite his disappearance, Shay's case has not received as much media attention as it should, and there is a growing need to raise awareness to help bring him home. If you have any information on Shay's whereabouts, you are encouraged to contact the Maple Grove Police Department at 763-494-6100. His family is urging the public to share his information across social media platforms in hopes of increasing visibility and finding Shay. The more people who see his face, the better the chances are of bringing him home safely. In cases like this, every share can make a difference. So please, if you can, share this video and information to help spread the word about Shay Terson and bring him back to his loved ones. Becky Look was last seen in Hollock, Minnesota, on October 1, 1995. That day, she spoke with her daughter on the phone and cashed a check. After that, she had no further contact with her family. Earlier that year, Becky had moved to Minnesota from New Mexico with her boyfriend. They had a history of partying and drinking excessively, and there were indications of domestic violence within their relationship. Despite this, Becky stayed in regular contact with her mother and her 3 daughters, and she had mentioned that she was considering moving back to New Mexico. Becky's disappearance wasn't reported until February 1996, several months after she was last heard from. There were rumors that she had boarded a bus and returned to New Mexico, but there was no evidence to support this claim. Furthermore, her local friends were surprised that she didn't say goodbye to them, which they felt was unusual for her. She didn't own a vehicle, making it unlikely that she would have traveled on her own. Authorities have since lost contact with Becky's boyfriend, who they believe may be living in Florida. The circumstances surrounding Becky's disappearance remain unclear, and her case remains unsolved. John Morresy was last seen on the morning of July 14, 1999, around 1 a.m., on US 71, 2 miles south of Margee, Minnesota. A sheriff's deputy responded to reports from area residents who had noticed a suspicious man sitting in a car by the roadside. Morresy explained that his 1985 Chevrolet Suburban had broken down but refused the deputy's offer to call a tow truck. He claimed the car had stalled before and would start again after a while. His behavior was not unusual during the encounter. At 2:30 a.m., another police officer checked the area and found that Morresy was gone. His car remained behind, unlocked, with his wallet and 2 dogs still inside, which was very out of character for him, as he was known to be devoted to his pets. Witnesses later reported seeing Morresy walking down the center of the road around 1:15 a.m. One motorist had to swerve to avoid hitting him. The motorist described Morresy walking directly toward the vehicle, as if he wanted to be hit, which raised concerns about his state of mind. Despite a search of the area, no trace of Morresy was found, and it is possible that he may have hitched a ride out of the region. Morresy, a respected figure from St. Paul, Minnesota, had grown up in the area, attended St. Thomas Academy and the University of Minnesota, and had worked as a carpentry instructor at the St. Paul Technical Institute for 21 years. He was also involved in the Democratic Party and the Knights of Columbus. John Morresy left behind his wife, 2 sons, and 4 daughters. His case remains unsolved, and while his family believes he may be dead, the circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain mysterious. William Underhill was last seen at a party on March 1st, 1969, near 14th Avenue and 5th Street on the west bank of the University of Minnesota's Minneapolis St. Paul campus. The gathering consisted mainly of high school friends. At some point, William left the party, and when a friend went outside to search for him, he was nowhere to be found. Later that evening, between 9 o'clock and 11 p.m., William made a phone call to his girlfriend. During the conversation, he told her that he was going away and hoped she would always remain a good person. This cryptic message was interpreted as a breakup, but William refused to disclose his location and sounded sad. After that call, William was never heard from again. A few days after his disappearance, a friend returned William's leather jacket to his parents, and his wallet was found inside. His sudden disappearance prompted a missing persons report to be filed. At the time, William was a student studying liberal arts at the University of Minnesota. He lived with his family in the 1200 block of Raymond Avenue and commuted to school, only about 2 miles away. Despite efforts to investigate his case, his disappearance remains unsolved, and the circumstances surrounding it remain a mystery to this day. Mildred McQuillin was last seen on June 17, 1975, driving her pea green 1968 Dodge South on East Bad Medicine Lake Road near Ponsford, Minnesota, on her way to visit a couple she knew. The weather had been rainy, making the unpaved roads muddy, and a few miles into the 18-mile trip, McQuillin's car stalled. A postal carrier she knew stopped to help her get the car started again. However, not long afterward, McQuillin took a wrong turn just a mile from her friend's home and asked a truck driver for directions. He was the last person known to have seen her. McQuillin never arrived at her friend's home, and 3 days later, her car was found abandoned and stuck in the mud on an unused logging road about 100 feet off East Bad Medicine Lake Road, 35 miles west of Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. The location was in a heavily wooded, swampy area across the street from the couple's cabin she had planned to visit. Searchers initially looked through the area, but found no sign of McQuillin. 3 days later, a more extensive search by 52 members of the National Guard turned up her scarf and belt, which were found hanging from a bush in plain sight. Her daughter believes these items may have been planted after the initial search was conducted. Her daughter also noted that the couple McQuillin was supposed to visit never attempted to search for her. When police interviewed the man, they found his clothes were wet, and when asked why, he claimed he had been walking along the road. However, the officers suspected the clothes were too wet to have simply been from walking on the road and believed he might have been walking through tall grass in the woods. Mildred McQuillin was the youngest of 10 children and had a close relationship with her family, particularly her children and grandchildren. She enjoyed cooking and playing cards. Her daughter believes that McQuillin may have been murdered, though the case remains unsolved. On Halloween night of 2016, 17-year-old Jeremy Jordane vanished without a trace from Bemidji, Minnesota. Jeremy, who was raised by his grandfather, Joseph, in Cass Lake, a town about 15 to 20 minutes away, was a typical teenager with a love for basketball and video games. He was very close with his family, especially his grandfather and his aunt, Alexandra. Jeremy had dreams of winning a state basketball tournament and earning a scholarship to attend college. Although he was dedicated to his academics and basketball, he was also known to be more of a homebody, preferring to spend time with his family rather than engage in parties or other social events. This, however, made his sudden disappearance on Halloween night all the more puzzling. Jeremy's family described him as a focused, responsible young man who was hardworking and rarely made impulsive decisions. On the night he disappeared, Jeremy made plans to attend a party with his friend in Bemidji. At around 9 p.m., his friend picked him up and drove the short distance to a party on the 500 block of Wood Avenue in Bemidji in the Nightmare neighborhood. Jeremy was no stranger to the area. His older sister, Jasmine, lived in Bemidji, and Jeremy often visited her. It was also common for him to be in the area, visiting friends or family. His familiarity with the neighborhood made it less likely that he would get lost or feel out of place. At the party, Jeremy met up with his sister Jasmine, though it's unclear whether she had invited him or if their paths just happened to cross due to shared friends. Jasmine later described Jeremy as appearing to be in his usual calm state during their time at the party. However, there were a few unsettling details about the events leading up to his disappearance. Around midnight, Jeremy abruptly got up, ran out of the house, and fled down the road. His sister and other family members noticed his sudden departure and attempted to chase after him. Despite their efforts, they could not catch up with him, and after a while, they assumed he would either return to the party or find a ride home. No one seemed to think much of it at the time, believing that he was simply blowing off some steam. Unfortunately, Jeremy never returned to the party, nor did he make it home that night. The next morning, by 9 a.m., Jeremy was reported missing. His family gathered at his grandfather's house to discuss what had happened. At this point, Jasmine provided the police with the last detail she knew about Jeremy's actions. According to Jasmine and others at the party, Jeremy had stepped outside with some friends to smoke a cigarette. While outside, he reportedly said something like, "I'm out," before running off without further explanation. The circumstances surrounding Jeremy's sudden decision to run off are unclear. Some speculated that he may have been intoxicated or under the influence of drugs, though there is no confirmation of this. It's also possible that something had occurred at the party that caused Jeremy to want to leave abruptly, though no one knew what it might have been. The police initially took the case seriously and did not treat it as a typical runaway situation, which is common for cases involving missing teenagers. Despite his age and possible motives for running away, authorities did not dismiss the case outright. They began searching immediately, with the K-9 unit being dispatched to track Jeremy's scent from the party location. The scent trail, however, only lasted for a couple of blocks before it stopped entirely. This sudden end to the scent trail raised suspicions that Jeremy could have gotten into a car. If he had been picked up by someone, his scent would have been lost as the person drove away. Police conducted thorough interviews with everyone who had been at the party, including Jeremy's friends and family, in hopes of finding any clue about what had happened. They also searched the vehicles of everyone who had attended the party, hoping to find any sign of Jeremy, whether it be personal belongings, clothing, or any physical evidence that could lead to an explanation of his whereabouts. Unfortunately, nothing of significance turned up during these searches, and interviews didn't provide any concrete leads. A search was launched in the days following Jeremy's disappearance, involving 50 volunteers and 90 law enforcement officers, along with U.S. Border Patrol. The search covered a 3-square-mile area surrounding the location where Jeremy had last been seen. Despite combing through both private and public properties, the search yielded no new information. No signs of Jeremy were found, and nothing substantial came out of the interviews with potential witnesses. The police also encouraged locals to check their outhouses and other outbuildings for any signs of Jeremy, as temperatures in Minnesota during November can drop significantly. In an effort to explore all avenues, searchers also scoured nearby lakes, including Irving Lake, a large body of water near where Jeremy was last seen. Volunteers even used boats and canoes to search the lake. However, the search of the lake turned up no new leads, and Jeremy was not found in or around the water. The search continued for weeks, but as the weather worsened with the onset of a snowstorm, it became harder to search the area thoroughly. Despite this setback, police continued to follow up on any tips that came in. 1 year after Jeremy's disappearance, a tip came from someone who claimed to have spotted him in the city of Chicopee, which is located around 200 miles from Bemidji. The tip was vague, with the person stating only that they saw Jeremy. This tip like many others before it, led to nothing, and there were no confirmed sightings of Jeremy. Throughout the entire investigation, Jeremy's social media accounts remained inactive, and there was no indication that he had been in contact with anyone since the night he disappeared. His family was adamant that Jeremy would never have just run away without telling anyone. They described him as a person who loved his family, enjoyed spending time with his friends, and was deeply committed to his future. He was a well-adjusted teenager with a promising future, and for him to simply vanish without a trace seemed out of character. His family strongly believes that something happened at that party that triggered his sudden decision to run off, but they are unsure what it was. Some theorize that drugs or alcohol may have played a role in his disappearance, though this remains speculative. At present, Jeremy Jordane's disappearance remains unsolved, and there is still no concrete evidence or leads to explain what happened to him. His family continues to hold out hope that he may be found, but after nearly a decade, the case remains a mystery. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance, particularly his sudden decision to run from the party and the lack of any signs of him afterward, suggest that something happened that night that is still unknown.